morning, everybody, and or good afternoon, depending where you stand. And thank you very much for joining this second webinar about decarbonification and renewable energy project. A few weeks ago, we had a first webinar about oil and gas and petrochemical market trend and new business model. In respect with the success of this first webinar, we
Okay, welcome back. It seems that we have lost Jean-Charles connection, but that's no problem anyway. I will take care of this webinar. So thank you very much, as Jean-Charles was saying, for joining this webinar. When we were focusing really on the petrochem and oil and gas project on the first webinar 3 weeks ago, today we are really going to focus on decarbonification and renewable energy projects. Just starting by a few news on how to stay updated and stay tuned about our webinar. We'll start by the next webinar, and it will take care of all the digital technologies for the petroleum and renewable project. So the date has already been settled. It will be April 27th at the same timing. Of course, you can find in the comments and the conversation of this webinar all the link to download the invitation for this webinar. In the meantime, just two information. If you want to see again the videos of this webinar, you can go and check our LinkedIn page, To Be First Consulting. If you subscribe and follow us on the page, we will publish in the next days the slide and the videos about it. If you're interested by the slide, you can directly shoot me an email at this address you see below, Guillaume Jean, To Be First Consulting. I will answer you with a slide, of course. You can go also in the conversation of the webinar, and you will find the slide. The agenda today, the introduction, of course, about how we master data, about what we are based on, what we consider as decarbonification and renewables, some basic rules about ourselves. Then we'll go more about the transition from petroleum to new energy, explaining the differences and how you can go from one to another. Then we will make a market outlook about decarbonification and renewable projects. Then we'll go more in detail about the technical aspect of those projects and also the business opportunity which are behind. And then we'll talk about some market actors and business model dynamic around the world. And we will conclude at the end. In the meantime, during the presentation, we will not take questions. We'll take all the questions at the end. So you can go, there is a Q&A option in the webinar at the top, right to the conversation. Please ask your question during the webinar, and I'll take all the questions at the end of the session, of course. Few slides for the introduction of Project Smart Explorer and ourselves. First, Jean-Charles, who is not connecting anymore, but he is more welcome to join. In fact, he made the most of his career in ABB Group. He was a group vice president in charge of all the oil and gas, and he quit ABB to found To Be First Consulting to create Project Smart Explorer 9 years ago. It's a database where you have all the data about the energy market, petroleum and gas, and no new energy. And myself, I'm Jean-Guillaume, an engineer as well. I started my career in Siemens Oil and Gas. Then I worked for Air Liquide before joining To Be First Consulting to take care of all the renewable aspect of this Project Smart Explorer tool. Talking about Project Smart Explorer, it's our, let's say, database where we cover all the oil and gas, petrochem, and new energy projects around the world. It's a business intelligence platform for a company wanting to work on this market. And we have also a second activity, which is Industry 4.0 Smart Platform, where we help company work on collaborative mode into protecting the intellectual property in project for innovation. The database rules, just to give you an aspect about how we manage data and what we're going to talk about, because of course we are going to give you trends and tendency, and we are going to give you figures about this, but of course you need to understand how we source and track our figures to understand really the trends and the dynamic on the market. So our database is pretty simple. We trace 1,000 most active projects that we consider as active, meaning that over all the projects which are announced around the world, we just take care of the project which we believe will run. We have a threshold of $100 million capex investment for those projects. That's a threshold we use for petrochem and oil and gas projects. For new energy projects, especially when they have a strategic purpose, we have a threshold which is can go way below until, for example, $10 million for projects in hydrogen, where we know they are critical in developing the technology for those projects. This database is a running and a rolling, let's say, a list of projects because we archive projects 6 months after the EPC contract has been awarded, and we upload new projects every day. Meaning that today this database run on 80% of the project are either in pre-feed and feed stage, which is super early and really interesting for you to place and have a strategic proactive purpose on the database. So today in the database we have 3 categories you see on the right. Of course, we have been doing and covering very well for many years now all the oil and gas and petrochem market, which is upstream, midstream, and downstream, the traditional, let's say, petroleum industry. And last summer we uploaded, but we have been tracing those projects for more time than this. We uploaded what we call energy, which is, let's say, the joint of 2 bricks, all the renewable project and also the decarbonification. If we go in the detail of those applications that we trace right now, and we see that are, let's say, comparable to the petroleum industry, there are 40 applications, but we have grouped them under 7, let's say, categories. The first one and the first 2 categories are about decarbonification. Those projects are electrification, AC, DC, and also carbon capture, utilization, and storage. I'll go in more detail in the second part of this webinar. Then we have what we call all the renewables projects, which are hydrogen projects, solar, and windmill. And then we have utility projects, which are the power generation, water treatment also. They are really similar in terms of business to the renewables. That's why when we call both categories, decarbonification is more electrification and carbon capture, while renewables will put under this umbrella hydrogen, solar, windmill, power generation, and water treatment. First, and because many of you are really, let's say, warriors and well experienced in the petroleum industry and those new energy, what is brand new energy, meaning decarbonification and renewables, can be quite different and part of the energy transition. Here in this party, we will try to show you how you can jump from one to another. I think the first thing to remark, and it's really important to have this today, because we hear a lot of fantasy about new energy. Here is a market size comparison between oil and gas, petrochem, and new energy. Those figures are directly taken from our database, and you see here in red the petrochem market, here in blue the oil and gas, and in green the new energy market. What is taken from this? Of course, today, if we look at each market, oil and gas and petrochem are way higher in terms of volume and capex investment than those new energy. But what is rather important and interesting for us today is to see that those new energy markets, they are just growing, and they will come from a marginal, let's say, stage compared to oil and gas and petrochem to a size which will be comparable to those projects in the next 10 years. Meaning that this market is today at its birth, if we may say, but it will grow to a comparable size and it will become a huge market tomorrow. And of course, the effort has to be made today to be able to develop those technology and make the references to then harvest all the benefit from this market. If on this curve you see after 2021 here you have 2022, if you see those curves going down, it doesn't mean those markets are collapsing. It's just that as our database focuses on projects, we don't have the vision on those projects yet because they are too late in the future. meaning that it doesn't mean the market is going down. It's just that you represent the vision we have today over those years. But of course, I mean, if you see the vision we have as today, it's just growing, and having such amount of already business awarded and business forecast for those years just mean that those years will be at least at the same level as 2022. And okay, our guess is with the trends as we see them today, it should be higher at least. Now, if we look at what is done in petrochem and oil and gas comparable to new energy, the idea and the opportunity for many actors is really to convert and adapt the competencies and expertise you have in the petroleum industry, meaning, and we split them into onshore, offshore, midstream, and downstream, and to reuse those competencies and skills to jump on opportunities in new energy. So here we try to, link each type of competencies that you may reuse in the different application. I will go through only for the first category onshore, that you may reuse the qualification and expertise you have there for carbon capture project, but also for solar, for windmill, and water treatment. Of course, if you take offshore, electrification is of course one of the first unit that you need to bring offshore, but you will have the same, let's say, problematics, the same challenges, the same technology to be used in windmill, also in power generation and in water treatment. So the idea, if we are talking to this energy transition, every actor has to make it. Of course, it's not done in a click, okay, in one day to another. It's a transfer of skills you need to bring, and some applications in the new energy are closer to your daily job of today than others. And of course, you need to choose the right, let's say, entry door to go on those new energy market, and that's where we may help you. And this graph may try to give you an answer to this, to how to choose and how to go and look for those opportunities. Now, by market organization, if we look at the similarities and the differences of those markets, let's start by the similarities first. Those new energy projects, decarbonification or renewable, they have a project organization structure comparable to the petroleum industry. It's a little bit also the same value chain organization where you have an end user, engineering companies, OEMs, suppliers, sub-supplier, and then an infinite volume of contractors and maintenance people and stuff like that. So I would say the structure of the market is rather the same. Also, if you look at the type of investment, it's also a long-term investment. If you look at the timing of those projects, it's more or less the same idea. You will have 2-3 years where it's a bidding period, engineering period, construction period, and then those projects will run over a period of 20, 25 until 40 years. So let's say the timing of those projects is rather also the same as in the petroleum industry. So the business is quite comparable. Also, if we look at the end user side, end user might not be the same in many cases, and we'll go down in more details over this aspect, but at least the end user have the same profile, meaning you have 3 categories. You have the international oil company, Total, Shell, BP. You have the national oil company and nationally owned, like Equinor, Saudi Aramco, ADNOC, all those big boys, which are also putting a foot in those new energy. And you have many independent companies which are backed by bank and which are really active in this market. At the opposite, between the petroleum industry and petroleum sector and this new energy sector, you have differences. The first one is, for example, in the renewable, when we talk about electricity, water, or all this utility business, usually the business model is an energy as a service, meaning that the bid will not be over the price of the construction of a project, but it will be a bid over the price of the, let's say, service you will do, for example, the price of the electricity, the price of the water. And it's quite different from the oil industry where you have this barrel price going up and down, going banana, which is reflecting the market. And it's kind of a liberty that you don't have in the new energy business because most of the contracts are closed market with long-term agreements between local authorities and operators. Meaning that this market is quite stable. That's the difference also we have in the petroleum industry between oil and gas, where the gas is a market which is more driven by long-term frame agreement. So it's quite comparable to the gas for this extent. The 2 other differences are that the operators are often also integrating the activity of engineering and construction. because as they bid for the whole project, they will do and carry on, build, own, operate their plant. And the last difference is, of course, a local distribution of the production. When you have an oil and gas project, the oil may be produced here on one side of the earth, but it would be consumed on the other one. That's something we don't see much often, let's say, in the renewable and decarbonification project. Usually, if you are starting to produce electricity, you are going to serve your local market. The same with hydrogen or with water. It's really a local distribution of the production. So the midstream part might be smaller and less intensive than what we have in the oil and gas. Now, talking about contract and frame agreement, I will make a split between renewable and decarbonification because the situation is a bit different in both cases. Renewable business model, you will find independent power production and build, own, operate, and transfer contract, or build, own, and operate. And really, the business model will be energy as a service, meaning local authorities will pay for a kilowatt or by volume of water treated and stuff like that. Where at the opposite, in decarbonification, we'll have business model which is rather close to the petroleum industry, because for the simple reason that decarbonification projects are, for let's say, the lion's share, driven directly by traditional operators of the oil and gas industry. So they really follow this framework of FEED and EPC contract to deliver a project. Now, if we look at the market outlook and figures for those decarbonification and renewables projects, here you have the curve of this growing market. Again, if after 2023 you see that this market is going down, it doesn't mean that the market is going down and it will collapse. It just reflects the vision we have of today of the project that have been announced and have been running. So of course, in the coming years, project will be announced and it will sustain a growth. Our vision is quite accurate, at least, and super precise on the next 2-3 years. And what you can see here, you have 2020, 2021, 2022. So you see that this market is just going to skyrocket from what was really poor to huge amount of investment. Why we have seen this graph and we have been experiencing this growth is, of course, because after the COVID crisis, when all the government put money on the table to inject in their local economy, support their people, they were not doing it really too much in the petroleum industry. They were targeting for, let's say, the future technology and trying to drive their economy for tomorrow business. Also, for a political game, it's way easier to support all the renewable and decarbonification project to petroleum industry. So that's why in 2020, the year was really, let's say, a pivot year, because all those investments have been going crazy and all the, let's say, regulation was also starting to become quite mature to support all those investments. So you see this market just rocketing with a growth which is just 50% from one year to another, and it should at least sustain over a period of 10 years an average of 15% growth. So that's why it will become not a marginal market compared to petroleum industry, but it will become something which is quite comparable. This is the forecast. Now, if we look at the figure of the project which have been awarded, so it's not really, let's say, a forecast, it's actual numbers of business awarded. You see, it's taking exactly the same trends with the same timing. And as of today, at the end of Q1 2021, we see that the EPC award corresponds to 50% of our forecast, which means that by the end of the year, we should finish higher than our forecast. It's just that the project has not been announced yet, but it will come. So we are really on a year which are growing just by 100% from one year to another, and it will keep this pace for at least 2-3 years. Then it will decrease a little bit, but that's is the message we want to pass you today. Is that even if today it's a little bit marginal, tomorrow it will be a huge market with full of opportunities, and many opportunities can be done by all the people and actors from the petroleum industry. Now, if we look at the type of operator of this business, it's quite unlike the petroleum industry, where you have the international company still playing a big part in this market. Here, it's a little bit different. because in blue you have the international oil company, Shell, Total, Exxon, BP, all those big boys. In green you have the independent company, and in red you have the nationally owned company, and you see that this market is really into the end of the independent and national company. In fact, the IOC only represents 7% of the market. So this is a figure for the forecast that we have. Now, if we look at the same graph, but for the EPC contract awarded, so meaning business which has been already signed, there you see that the independent are just signing business and are really taking the lead with 60% of the market share. NOC are also taking a pretty big amount, but there is always this effect for a national company where the government has a word to say in those projects. So it happens quite often for a political game that projects are announced, but we don't see the financing going on later on. So of course we have to be pretty careful about this. And you see the IOC are also in their share just awarding half of what they are forecasting. But even if they are making the biggest amount of communication over this, they are quite marginal actor of this new energy project. So really the focus will be on independent and national oil company. We'll go in more detail on this. Now project type, we'll go in more details about each project type that we have in the database, just explaining the technical, let's say, aspect globally. Okay, we don't go in too much detail. And then we'll have, of course, the business figures about it. The first point will be about decarbonification projects. So of course, electrification. What the goal of electrification? The idea is for offshore application, not to produce your electricity on the spot using gas turbine because it produces a lot of CO2 emission. The idea is to have a cable to bring the electricity from onshore application to the offshore plant. How to do that? You have two technology. Of course, high voltage alternative current. This application is suitable for distance of offshore platforms which are less than 150 kilometers from the shore. The advantage is, even if you have many losses over such a long distance, that you have a light transformer installation to have offshore. Sorry. At the opposite, if your distance is above this threshold of 150 kilometers, you may have to pass by direct current technology, and at this time you have less losses, which is quite preferable. But at the opposite, you need a large conversion installation, which might represent, for example, 3,000 tons. So meaning that on the side of your offshore platform, you may have just another platform to make this electrical conversion. So it's quite good money, I would say, for all the electrical manufacturers, because those projects will become just a must-have in the future. And the other part of those projects is, of course, the gas turbine that you need to replace by high voltage electrical motors and drive. Of course, you don't need the gas turbine anymore, but you still may need all those movement and mechanical equipment. And there, the power can go from 50 to 300 megawatts. The idea is that it's more available, it's more efficient, and more secure, and it also requires low maintenance. If we look at the business figures, here you have the forecast year to year. Again, if it goes down, it doesn't mean that the market is collapsing. It's just the vision. It just reflects the vision we have of today of this market, and it's just a huge investment always. If we look at what has been awarded already, you see that 2021 will be strong, 2022 will be strong also, and 2023 is already taking a good path. If we look at the type of operators which are making those investments, you see that independents and NOC are representing more or less all the market. Okay, they are representing 45% of this market each. What is kind of specific with those actors is that they don't make bids for the EPC contract. They just turn the FEED contract into EPC contract. So if you are not involved at the FEED stage, it's impossible to enter then at the EPC stage. So you have to be quite quick to interact on those projects. The good part of this project is that it's really a quick win to decrease your CO2 impact for those operators, because as soon as you have this electrification, you can say, okay, we have decreased our CO2 emission by 10 million tons a year, and it's just a huge amount for what is, at the end of the day, small investment in comparison. What is also important to note is that any offshore plant that will be built in the future, most likely it will be mandatory to have this electrification, either in Europe or in Middle East. It will be mandatory to make it electrical, because gas turbine just emit too much CO2, and it's not accepted anywhere in the world now. Second application of the decarbonification is, of course, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Okay, you have on one side, on the top left, the carbon capture. Here, the idea is to seize the gas which are responsible for global warming. The idea is not to catch this gas from any car that is passing in the street or from any code that are in the field. The focus of carbon capture is really to revamp all the industrial applications which are responsible for 60% of the CO2 emission. And in this, you have few applications. You have the power chain, you have the steel, the cement plant, the fertilizer, and the petrochem. The idea is really to have, let's say, a revamp of all these plants to add a carbon capture unit on top of this factory or plant. Carbon capture can be done in different ways. It can be done before the combustion, during the combustion, or in post-combustion in the gases which are just going out of the process. You have here the efficiency, but of course the post-combustion carbon capture is the technology most developed today, and it's the one which is most looked after. Then when you have captured this carbon, of course, you need to transport it because you are not going to store it in the same place where you are going to capture it. The idea is you have a loop which is a little bit the opposite one of the natural gas, where the natural gas goes from, let's say, a gas field offshore by a pipeline, blah, 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 back to the industrial application. Here it's the opposite. You are going from the industrial plant to a gas field offshore to be reinjecting on the ground. The storage can be done in two ways. There are really two ways to do it. It can be onshore, where you have gas injection in a natural reservoir for isolation. It can be existing natural cave. It can be mine, aquifer, saline formation. The idea is to reuse small installations which are already available because they have been used for several years already to store any gas or to export any gas. At the opposite, you have an opportunity for the petroleum industry in this storage because it's really easy to reuse a depleted or depleting oil and gas field to re-inject CO2 underground. I mean, you just take your compressors, more or less, you turn it around, and by not pumping up, but by pumping down, you can inject CO2 into the ground, and you can store carbon in a quite efficient way for few million of investment. And in this time, it's pretty easy for a company to make a communication about it because they can reuse the installation and not pay for the decommissioning of it. So it's quite interesting, and it's quite something to look after. Here, if we look at the figures, you see that it was quite quiet for several years. And of course, in 2020, everybody came back on the market and saying, okay, we have to go strong. 2021 is just taking a huge step. And of course, 2022, you see those figures, it's just doubling every year. So carbon capture is really a trend which is going to stay. And of course, those projects are quite close to the petrol industry, so they can represent a huge opportunity for all the actors who want to start this energy transition. Sorry. If we look at what has been awarded already, it's taking the same path, so we are quite confident that this market will grow to be not marginal, but quite a good business, and with technology which are kind of for them available today, but some are not available and still need to be developed. For example, all the injection on the ground, there are still discussion if it should be done as a liquid CO2, if it should be done as CO2 dissolved in water, or if it could be just done as gas CO2. If you look at the actor on this market, of course, it's well dominated by 70% by the national oil company. Today, we have many pilot projects and demonstrators with phase 1, phase 2 already in the pipe to go in more industrial ways. And it's today that you need to jump to develop your technology and get the references to get and harvest the business of those things tomorrow. You have to know that those projects are mainly driven by NOCs, but are, let's say, subsidized by government to clean industrial zone and to benefit, of course, to the pledge that many countries have to be carbon neutral by 2050. Now, if we look into the renewables, hydrogen, you have different type and ways to produce hydrogen. You have the gray and the brown, which are, let's say, I would say the common and old traditional way to produce hydrogen. The problem is that you crack a coil or you crack a gas to produce hydrogen, and you emit just a huge amount of CO2, which is not really acceptable anymore. The good part is that you have large capacities of production. As the opposite, let's say the technology of tomorrow and today are the blue and the green, and that's what we try to focus on, because that's what should be the market tomorrow. So the blue is pretty easy concept. You take a gray or a brown cracking gas and coil, and you just add the carbon capture unit on the top of it. So it can be done by revamping or as a brownfield. And the idea is to have no CO2 emission, but still a large capacity of production. And it's based on today's technology. It's quite well done. You have many projects, for example, in UK following this project, and it's quite simple. It's really close to the petroleum industry. If we look at really in the future, 10, 15 years period, what should dominate the hydrogen market is, of course, the green hydrogen, which is the hydrolysis of water to produce oxygen and hydrogen. The good part is that it's zero emission process, so you don't have CO2 anywhere. But the problem that it's still limited by the capacities of electrolyzer, because electrolyzer today are around 10 megawatt, when if you want to have an industrial application, you should have at least 20 times more, 50 times more capacity for electrolyzer, but it will come. Electrolyzer are growing quite fast. And the two other aspects behind this green hydrogen, that you need a water treatment unit, because to split this water into oxygen and hydrogen, you really need to have almost a pure water to go and work with. And also you need to have green electricity. So it means that you need to have a huge amount of electricity which coming from renewable, for example, a windmill, to be able to produce green hydrogen. If we look at the market, same let's say figure as carbon capture, you see that this market is just going crazy and just growing by time 2 every year. It's happening, it's supported very well. Here you see what has been already awarded 2020 in comparison with 2021. So it's a huge business that we see coming in the market today. The technology is pretty tough, to be honest. When you need to manage hydrogen in a liquid way, you are almost at the zero and absolute zero. So its technology still needs to be developed. The independents are really leading the way with 60% of the market. Of course, they are not doing any EPC bid. They are just transforming FEED contract into EPC contract, and sometimes they just sign both at the same time. Those projects are going fast track, and they are driven by government subsidies, especially in Europe, as you can see, or in Australia, where it's becoming a strategic, let's say, political game to develop this supply chain of hydrogen. Then type of solar, we focus on two types. On one side, all the photovoltaic projects where you can have, and the idea is pretty simple, is to generate electricity from the conversion of sun photon. Different type of projects, it can be simple phase or double phase, meaning that you can catch the sun, but also the reflection from the sun, which is coming back from the ground. And here you have large onshore installation where you need to have a permanent maintenance to clean the dust and the sand from those projects and from those panels, because of course if you have dust on the panels, the production is lower. And those projects are quite viable, but only in certain regions of the world. For example, in Northern Europe, it's impossible to have this. Even in South Europe, you don't have this break-even point that you may have, for example, in Middle East or in Australia. So it's really, let's say, a regional market, and it has to be taken. It's a large project always. They may cover thousands of kilometers square to be viable. So you may have lots of, let's say, resistance from local population to have such project. At the other side, you have thermal solar, which is less trendy, but it is in good development. And the idea is to generate electricity from the conversion of sun heat, meaning you have a lot of mirrors displays around the tower, where at the top of the tower you have a liquid, saline liquid with a specific combustion. And the idea is really to heat this liquid to then convert this thermal heat into electricity. The benefit of those projects is that you are not dependent of the sun, meaning that you can use this thermal inertia to also produce electricity at night, which is a big plus for solar project. Also, those projects today, they are not at their, let's say, industrial stage, they are more at the demonstrator stage. The advantage is also that they have low maintenance and cover small area. So we really see them in the future coming on the market. And if you have technology for those projects, it might be really interesting to follow the few pilots which are going to build, because it will take part of the solar industry as well at the same size of the photovoltaic, most likely. If we look at the figures, the growth is here for the solar project. It's not at the same size as we may have for carbon capture or for hydrogen or for windmill, but it's still growing. You see what has been awarded. Okay, we are on a good trend, and the only tricky part, I would say, is that those projects are dominated by huge, let's say, projects which are in a dozen of billion of investment. And at the opposite, you have really small projects. You don't have this, let's say, middle-class project where they are numerous and quite efficient to follow. Either they are really big, either they are quite local projects. All those projects are, not all, but most of them are driven directly by independent company. And those operators are also doing engineering and the construction of those projects. So you have really to be early at the pre-FEED stage of those projects to be able to sell your product on this. Now going to the windmill, which today is, let's say, the most active project in renewables. You have three categories, and here it's really interesting to see the figures behind each project. You have the onshore. Okay, you may have medium turbines, maximum 8 megawatts, because wind is weaker onshore than offshore. And usually those projects are facing a huge opposition from local population and communities. So it's quite hard to run. They are often quite delayed for a long time. But they also have a capacity which is topping maximum 100 megawatt, 200 megawatts, and they have a charge factor of 40%. Knowing that the charge factor is the volume, the average volume of production over a year compared to the maximum capacity you can produce. At the comparison, we have two offshore technology today on the market. The fixed offshore, meaning that it's a giant turbine which are fixed into the seabed directly with cement. So this is all the projects that we are seeing in UK today, in China, also in US. Here you can have giant turbine. Today they are maximum 14 megawatt, but in the next years they will go up to maybe 20 megawatts, and it's going quite strong and increasing year to year. The wind offshore is also stronger, so that's why you can have more or bigger turbine at least. But the problem is that the maintenance is quite complex, because when you need to drop someone into a fixed offshore windmill, you need to have a crew with the scale. It's quite complex, so the maintenance is quite expensive on those projects. The limit to have a fixed offshore windmill is that the seabed has to be maximum 60 meters. When it's above and more deep than this, then it's really hard, and you have to pass to the floating offshore platform. What is also important is that you have 5% more of charge factor for offshore. And you can have also projects which are way bigger in terms of number of turbines, meaning that those offshore projects, they can go to 1 gigawatt, 1.2 gigawatt for the biggest. So the turbines are bigger. You have less also, let's say, opposition from the local communities. So that's why those projects are just growing crazy, and they are quite efficient and quite profitable as well. What is and the last and quite interesting project are the floating offshore, meaning that the windmill is not dropped into a fixed, let's say, cement platform. It's really dropped into a floating platform on the top of water. So it means that here you may have smaller giant turbine, but you have an easiest offshore wind. So it means that you may produce even more. And in fact, those floating platforms, they are not sealed to the, of course, floating, they are not sealed to the seabed, but you still have links and chain to make them not move, I would say. Today, we have some pilot projects, not really industrial scales, but the first figure coming back from those tests is that the charge factor is 55%. So you are 10 points higher than those fixed offshore platform. And of course, if you have a higher charge factor with a heavier wind, you can produce way more, and the difference is there. So of course, those projects are really interesting. And of course, the best people to make floating platform are the people from the oil and gas, because they are the one with the experience to do so. So that's something really to look after, and it will develop like crazy in the coming years. Here, if we look at the numbers that we are forecasting, you just see that there is a huge boom in 2021. It should be stable from our figures. As you can see, you have kind of a plateau. Why is this effect? Is that because projects have to be announced when the bids from the government are announced, and we are expecting the bid from UK, US, and China to be open in Q2 2021. So that's why those figures for the years are going a little bit down. But in fact, in 3 months' time, I'm pretty sure that will be just twice higher 2021. It's just that those projects has not been announced yet, but they're already in the pipeline. If you look at what has been awarded, the same figures, you see that a huge amount has been awarded, and the amount awarded in 2021 is already way higher than what has been awarded last year, even if we are just at the end of Q1 2020. Who is leading the game? I would say it's into the end of the NOC, but the independents are not so far behind. The idea there and behind this market, which can be tricky, that the operator are also doing the construction and the engineering of those projects. The main decision is really to who is going to build those turbines. Either going to be Vestas, Siemens Gamesa, or GE, and that's where really the race is. But if you are bringing any equipment on the top of those turbines, of course, it's a wonderful game. The bids for this project, it's really long-term power contract that companies are passing with local authorities. So the finances of those projects is quite easy to do. And today those projects are profitable. So of course, banks have really easy to support those projects. Now going to power generation, but you may know already those applications are quite simple for people of the energy structure. Just a small difference. On one side, you have every power generation, which is fossil fuel, meaning coal, gas, and oil. The idea is you have a high reliability, you have cheap electricity. It's quite an easy process, quite mature. The problem that you have a huge amount of CO2 emission, which is not acceptable today. But those projects have an opportunity because you can now put, let's say, a carbon capture unit to clean them, and that's why you are still seeing, for example, coal power generation project happening, because we know that behind they have a carbon capture option, and there you make them clean, and it's quite efficient for many countries, especially in developing countries. The other solution on the side, which is let's say a double win solution, is the waste to energy. So meaning that you burn your domestic waste to generate electricity. For many countries around the world, especially developing countries, it's a win-win, as I was saying, because you remove your waste, you have high reliability, and at the opposite, well, you have a lot of CO2 and you have low capacity of electricity. But if you add this magic brick of carbon capture, then you can clean it, and it's quite efficient. So that's why we see some market and some, let's say, growth in this market, because it's quite, let's say, a transition brick that you can have into going to renewables by having a waste to energy with carbon capture technology. Here you have the figures of the market. Of course, this market is quite smaller to all the market we have been looking before, but it's still a good business. Here you have the forecast. It will be growing on the next years, of course. If you look at what has been awarded, it's taking the same path, so we are quite secure about this. And what is also interesting is to see that this market is only independent and IOC. We don't even talk about the international companies are not even on this market, but it's a domestic market. It's a build, own, and operate contract. Usually operators have with local authorities, so projects are going quite strongly, and you have many projects around the world. Some are really small, okay, have let's say 100 million investment, but some can be really big. For example, in Middle East, you have some project which can top 2 billion, 3 billion investment. So it's quite a huge opportunity for your equipment as well. The last category, but not the least, is of course the water treatment. Water treatment is something which is quite usual in the petroleum industry, because in some fields you may have to pump into the field 2 barrels of water to take back 1 barrel of oil or gas. So it means that you have all this water treatment, which you need to clean the water before injecting it into your industrial, let's say, application, and you need to treat it again after it has been used. That's something we have in large volume in enhancing oil recovery operation. So that's why you need to treat the water before and after it has been used. And of course, as a regulation by governments over those as a standard for the water to be released after it has been used into an industrial process is getting stricter every year, which means that those projects are just growing, they are becoming more complex, more expensive, because the requirements are getting stronger. So it's quite a good business, and managing water is a little bit like managing oil, different condition, but still you have all this pipeline application and stuff like valves, compressors, pump, and stuff like that. So it's quite interesting to look after. The second application we see in the water, which is just skyrocketing at the moment, is water desalination. The idea behind it is to transform seawater into drinkable water, clean water for population, but also for hydrogen, because for green hydrogen, you really need to have a clean water. And for many countries, we don't have access to, let's say, pure water or rivers and stuff like that. Your only solution is to go with water desalination. So here you have two technologies, reverse osmosis or membrane technology, but still you have many projects, especially in Middle East, which are representing just a huge amount of business possibilities for you. Water treatment, if we look at the figures, okay, it's just starting now. Because we have been tracing it for a few years already, but usually it was, let's say, just a brick integrated to petroleum project. No, today we see three as a market with their own project of water treatment and water desalination. You see that this market is taking quite a normal pace, let's say, compared to other. You don't have a huge boom, but quite a stable increase. That is, for example, it's driven by for population growth. So you are following these traits, and of course you will need to have every year more projects because population are just growing. If you look at what has been awarded, you see that those projects are quite stable, and you see the volume awarded is quite nearly the same as what has been forecast, which means that when we talk about water, of course, those projects are just going to happen, okay? It's not about the price, it's about the value it creates, and you cannot leave your population without drinkable water, as simple as this. And if you look at the market, you see that this market is only driven by national owned company, because of course they need to deliver water to their population. Contracts usually are signed by a volume of water per day, which means that you can bring just let's say an advantage innovation for the OPEX cost, because you know that the CAPEX will not be the main focus of the operator. Now, going to the global outlook, and that's the last part of our webinar today. If we look at the map of all these new energy projects going around the world, here you see there are few zones which are quite intensely working on. Europe is of course the first hub for all those new energy. Could be decarbonification of renewable projects. It's not a surprise. Everybody knows that Europe is really the center and masterpiece for those projects. What can be surprising is the amount of projects you also find in Middle East. Middle East is really trying to take this turn over and preparing after the petroleum industry, and you see that they are starting to be quite strong. And then of course the main region are China, not region but country, are United States, and Australia is also making a huge investment and huge effort to go after those projects. So those are the hubs really, if you want to start your energy transition, those are the hubs that you have to be there. Looking at the financing of those projects, and here again I'll make the split between renewables project and decarbonification project. Renewables projects are more utility contract you pass with local authorities, which is completely different than the petroleum. If we focus on the windmill and solar, those projects are today profitable. It was questionable for many years, but all the projects which are launched today will be profitable, so they will have no financing problem, because the banks are really happy to finance those projects. At the opposite, the blue and green hydrogen are not so viable economically speaking. So of course, those projects are supported by big corporates and public subsidies who just want to build pilot projects to, let's say, take advantage of those technology in the next 5 to 10 years. And we see in renewables many also public and private partnership. which can be quite challenging to organize for you to follow those projects, but it's still quite a good business. At the opposite, the decarbonification project, if we look at the financing, to be honest, decarbonization is today not a value as itself. I mean, you cannot sell the fact that you are not emitting CO2. So the financing of those projects is made by government subsidies for most of them. They are part of large programs, The second, let's say, mean of financing is also large corporate, just trying to invest to reduce their carbon footprint. Can be for communication purpose, could be because they have, let's say, an engagement to reduce their carbon footprint. But anyway, many pilot projects and demonstrators are into the exploring technology right now, and it's really the right moment to jump on those projects. Looking at, I mean, we have been talking about the financing of those projects. Of course, as we were saying, many of those projects are financed by either governments or are motivated by the regulation that governments are implementing in their country. So here we try to map all the countries we have pledged to become carbon neutral. Just to give you an idea about the regulation behind and the program they are going to implement to follow this track. And here you have the different years to give you the time frame about this. So of course the Nordic countries are the more advanced and more aggressive on those technology, but then comes Europe, US, Canada, some Argentina, Chile sometime, South Africa as well. And you have China, which is just 10 years behind on their pledge, but we can trust China to catch up because they are really going strongly into windmill and hydrogen application. So most likely they will catch up on the time frame as well. But here they give you an idea of where to go and where it will be moving on the most efficient way. Going to the conclusion, I'll start by the decarbonification project. Knowing that the petroleum demand will last until 2050 at least at the same level, decarbonification is a must because the petroleum industry will not disappear because there is a strong demand for it. But at the same time, you need to reduce its CO2 emission, and the only way to do it is to those decarbonification projects. So of course, it will be a huge driver of this market. The advantage with those decarbonification projects is that you have an immediate saving of CO2, which is done with available technology, or technology will be available in the next 2 to 3 years. Also, the opportunity for you is to transfer your competencies you have in the petroleum industry to this sector, which is going to bring a quite big growth for your market. And we know that this market will just grow at least until during the next 10 years. So it can represent a lot of information and a lot of advantages. Same market structure as the petroleum industry, so it's quite easier, and it's concentrated in few regions, meaning US, Northern Europe, all these North Sea area are really the hotspot for carbon capture. Now the conclusion for renewable, it's quite a capital-intensive market, like we have in the petroleum industry. For some application, the profitability can be challenging, but still you always have governmental support with subsidies, which means that those projects are just happening anyway. And you have several pilot and demonstrator where we will start on the next month. So you have to be there to develop those technology and take the first responsibility and references on those projects to be able to harvest from your experience later on. And this market, and this I cannot say it enough and stress it enough, this market will grow to a comparable size of the petroleum sector by 2030. So you need to make your effort right now to be able to invest in the next 5 years for your company. And it's also an opportunity for you to transfer your competencies because you have them to go on those markets, and you should be the one taking advantage of it. Here we are coming to the end of the presentation.